welcome to the Investigative Journal. I'm Tal Heinrich in New York. The war of words between the U.S. and the Iranian regime continues. People are talking of a new tanker war, reminiscent of the crisis in the 1980s. Oil tankers are being seized in the Arabian Gulf as the situation becomes increasingly tense. The international community has its focus on Iran's destructive regional activities, but today we would like to pay attention to some domestic actions by the Iranian regime. During President Hassan Rouhani's tenure, Iran has failed to live up to its promise to improve human rights. Iran has the world's highest rate of executions per capita. It has jailed up to 30 dual nationals since 2015, including 19 Europeans, 7 Americans, and have used them as bargaining chips for political gains. This practice has become more often since President Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal. As of today, there are close to 12 known dual nationals, including 4 Americans, who were grabbed in Iran while doing their jobs or simply visiting their families. The operating arm here is almost always the Revolutionary Guards, who have been recently designated in the U.S. as a terrorist organization. Most recently, in June, French-Iranian academic Fariba Adelkha was detained and denied consular assistance. And then again, in August, Kamil Ahmadi, a British-Iranian dual national, was arrested in western Iran. With us today from Washington, D.C. is Jason Rezian, an Iranian-American journalist who served as the Tehran bureau chief for the Washington Post in 2014, when he was arrested and later unjustly convicted of espionage in a secret trial. Jason, thankfully, he was released from Evin prison with 3 other Americans 500 days later, and after a deal was struck in what seemed like a prisoner exchange during the Obama administration. Jason, thank you for joining us today. What do we know? What do we know about these recent new arrests that happened while we were preparing for this show of Fariba and Kamil?
Well, I think what we know about the most recent arrests is that it's a part of a 40-year trend inside the Islamic Republic of taking foreign nationals for the purpose of extracting political concessions from other countries. They've been known to do this since the revolution, when they took the U.S. Embassy and its diplomats hostage for 444 days. It's continued throughout the 1980s, 90s, the 2000s, up until this decade, when I and others were taken and held hostage, almost always with the very obvious and transparent intent to later swap those people for some sort of concession from another country. The other thing that is pretty clear in most of these cases is that the people who are taken hostage are not being held for having committed any specific crime. It's more that they fit a certain profile that the Iranian regime thinks that it can use to get political gain from other countries.
You're talking about being used as bargaining chips. Is that how you felt? We remember how the world cheered when you were released among 4 Americans in 2016 in a prisoner swap. So is it fair to say that you were used by the Iranian regime?
Look, I think that in the 1.5 year period of time that I was being held, there were a lot of different twists and turns in the story. And while it may not have been the intent on day one that they were going to use me as a bargaining chip, it's certainly what happened in the end. So I think that's pretty plain to see for anybody who's looking at this closely, as I am. And it's a similar trend over and over and over again. The only difference is the countries involved, the individuals involved, and the variables involved. What it is that Iran deems a reasonable price for the people that they're holding.
Jason, can you share with us your story of how you were arrested and what was it like to be jailed in Evin as an Iranian American?
Well, obviously it was horrible. Any imprisonment is going to be difficult for anybody, but especially when it comes as such a surprise and based on really nothing. My wife and I were taken from our homes at gunpoint, handcuffed, blindfolded, and thrown into solitary confinement. And I spent the next 1.5 years in prison, and the first several weeks I had no idea of really what was going on, what I was being accused of. my wife's whereabouts or her well-being. So it's a terrible thing to have to go through, and I don't think that it ever fully heals. But ultimately, I had the good fortune of being released after a year and a half, and sadly, in the current context, most of the people that are being held in Iran are being held much longer than that. So it's a horrible fate, and one that I wouldn't wish upon anybody.
Do you know how many Americans are currently jailed in Iran?
Well, the numbers that we know of, there's at least 5, potentially more, and nationals of other countries as well, including the UK, France, Austria, and other nations.
What advice would you give the Trump administration in dealing with such arrests?
Well, the Trump administration prides itself, and rightfully so, on bringing home Americans who are being held in different countries around the world. But so far, they've failed completely to bring anyone home from Iran. So I think that they need to try much harder and open up channels of communication that could ultimately lead to the release of fellow Americans who are being unjustly detained.
Jason, what would you say is the main difference between the treatment that Iranian prisoners receive in jail and dual nationals?
Well, I was kept in isolation the entire time of my imprisonment, so I really can't speak to that.
Jason, thank you for sharing your experience, and for those interested to learn more about this saga, Jason's book, Prisoner, it just says it all.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, we'll talk to a U.S. resident and Lebanese national who has been arrested in Iran. Nizar Zakka will join us with his incredible story of how the Iranian government invited him to go there in the first place, then arrested him.
The Investigative Journal, TIJ, offers exclusive long-form investigations into the leading political, environmental, and public interest issues of the day. Our first-hand investigations focus on topics ranging from human rights, counterterrorism, corruption, cybercrime, just to name a few. These bombshell reports can only be found on the Investigative Journal. From New York, I'm Tal Heinrich.
Welcome back. Nizar Zakka, a Lebanese national and U.S. permanent resident, was arrested by Iran in 2015. He was imprisoned until 2019 on charges of espionage for the United States. Zakka worked as an internet freedom advocate and served as Secretary General of the Arab ICT Organization in Washington, D.C. before his arrest. Zakka was released by the Iranian government in June of 2019 following a request by Lebanon's President Michel Aoun. Nizar Zakka is now joining us on the Investigative Journal. Welcome, Nizar.
Hi, hello.
I'd like to start by reading.
I'm glad to have you.
I'd like to start by reading a comment from the person who had invited you to visit Iran in the first place, Shahneen Dkt. Molavardi, the top aide for citizenship rights to Iran's President Hassan Rouhani. She said the Iranian government had not approved Nizar's imprisonment and that we did all that we could to stop this from happening, but we are seeing that we have failed to make a significant impact. She blamed a complete miscoordination between Iran's civilian government and independent judiciary, adding that actions by one branch can ignore or neutralize efforts by another branch. Nizar, your story is really incredible. You were invited by the government to Tehran and were arrested by the government while there. Does that make sense to you after 4 years of your life were deprived? I mean, do these Iranian security, executive, and judicial bodies act totally separately?
I understand. I am aware of this, that the current government did not approve what's happening, and it's all about the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard. They run the show, at least from what I experienced, and they decided to kidnap me and take me hostage. And this is what happened. I was on my way back to the airport, and a civilian car came and stopped the taxi, took me down, blindfolded me, and kept me for many months. I don't know where I am or anything, and just calling me a spy.
What did they tell you at the time of your arrest?
They told me that some other people, like they had somebody who looks like me, he took my passport and flew to Beirut, so I should not expect anybody to ask for me. So I have nobody will ask for me, and they are the only people who can save me. I have to cooperate with them.
You know, we often hear of torture, prolonged solitary confinement, and forced confessions taking place in Evin prison specifically. Did you face such oppression there? How was your day-to-day life in that notorious prison?
You know, I advocate for freedom of expression and internet freedom, and what happened to me, it was really a big shock. And I was just put in a 2x4 room and blindfolded. I couldn't see anyone, and they put me into interrogation all day, and they put a piece of nuts of pistachio on the table, and they asked me to answer a question to have a pistachio. They make you starve, and they use the food like when we are training a dog. You get a treat when you answer a question. There is just a bunch of criminals, nothing more, nothing less.
I'm so sorry.
And I hope these people will get what they deserve, because nobody on earth deserves what happened to us. Nobody on earth. I am sure Jason faced the same, and I feel sorry for what he went through as well.
And Nizar, you were a permanent...
I do not speak the language. I do not understand the culture. I didn't know where I am. I have no idea that there is something called Revolutionary Guard and something called government or whatever. I'm going to a country invited by its vice president. At the time, Mrs. Mullaverdi was the vice president for Women Affairs. I was invited to her country. I asked her, as a Lebanese, I don't even need a visa to go. I said, please, I want to make sure that I am welcomed in your country. I would like to have a visa. And they sent me a visa in order to go. And on my way back, I was kidnapped and thrown in a 2x4 room.
This is absolutely unbelievable. And thank you so much for sharing your story. We really appreciate this. Nizar, you were also a permanent resident of the United States. At the time of your arrest, here's a statement by the U.S. government. The United States Congress approved 2 resolutions that mentioned you and other U.S. persons unlawfully detained in Iran. The Congress urged President Trump to take whatever steps are in the national interest to secure the release of such individuals. Lawmakers also stressed that there's a need to make the release of U.S. residents and legal permanent residents, aliens, held hostage in the Iranian government the highest of priorities. But the U.S. Congress wasn't the political entity that eventually brought your release from Iran. It was the help of Lebanon's president. How did your release come about, if you can tell us?
Many times they tell me that I am going to be released and that I should make a video in order to be released, and I refused repeatedly. And the last time I didn't expect to be released, and then they took me to a mall, shopping mall. They asked me to forgive them, and they told me that they want to give me a gift as a carpet, Persian carpet, to pick a Persian carpet, and then they made me spend 3 hours to pick a carpet. Every time I find a carpet, they say, no, you have to find another one. And they had the cameras filming me picking carpet, and then they took me I went to the airport. I found the head of security of Lebanon. I got on the plane with him and went back to Beirut. This is what happened. And my understanding is that it was a convenient thing for the Iranian due to the pressure, and Mr. Zarif was proposing exchange of hostages or prisoners, however he wants to call it. And the American and the U.S. government wanted a good gesture from Mr. Zarif. So I believe it was an exit strategy for Iran to send me to Lebanon, so they will not look like giving in to international pressure. While at the end of the day, I believe a lot has to do with the international pressure and the U.S. pressure on Iran.
But do you know today what was really going on? To what extent can we consider you and other dual national prisoners like you as bargaining chips for the Revolutionary Guards or for the Iranian regime?
It's not. They know. They call us bargaining. It's not like if we are sure. They treat us like a bargaining chip. They treat us like a product. They trade us. The day Jason left, I was moved to his bed. It's like we were a product on a shelf. A product was sold, they put another product on the shelf in a supermarket or something. We feel like we're being sold like old-day slaves.
What is your message,
it's
maybe?
Unbelievable. The experience we went... Excuse me, sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It is unbelievable. I wanted to ask you, I mean, what is your lesson from this experience or something that you would like to share with other people, for example, dual nationals who are considering going to Iran to visit their family, speaking at a convention like the one you were invited to? What should they know?
I went there, I didn't know what really is Iran about, and I advise everybody who wants to go, please be careful, don't go, try to avoid going. Most of the dual nationals who are hostages now, they came back to see their family members who are sick, their parents who are sick, and they took them hostages. This is how they do, this is how this regime has survived for 40 years. This is what they do best. They take people hostages. Don't go unless there is a complete end to hostage taking by this regime. It has to be understood by the whole global community, the UN, the international community, that this regime cannot take hostages anymore. Finish. Before this is clear, please don't go to Iran. You are just going to be another hostage.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
I have never hurted anybody in my life. I have never hurted anybody in my life. I have never done anything. I have been in the US. I don't have one traffic ticket. I don't have a G-walk. And at the end of the day, they throw me for years. I don't know why. I never knew what have I done. I told them, get me one witness, get me a taxi driver who will say I said one word against Iran, or I did anything. I have nothing. I just went. I believe in advocacy. I believe in freedom of expression. I believe in internet freedom, and this is why they invited me in the first place. And they took me because they wanted to stop all international companies from going back to Iran. They don't want openness. It's a message to stop all kind of openness. And they felt I am an easy target for them.
Nizar, your story definitely makes one's blood boil. It's very unfortunate, it's unjust, and we're very sorry to hear what you've been going through. But we thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and keep enjoying your freedom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I want just to tell you one word. We are trying to create an alliance of all hostages in order to advocate for other hostages not to face the same, to get freed and to speak out for them.
It sounds like a great initiative.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nizar.
The Investigative Journal, TIJ, offers exclusive long-form investigations into the leading political, environmental, and public interest issues of the day. Our first-hand investigations focus on topics ranging from human rights, counterterrorism, corruption, cybercrime, just to name a few. These bombshell reports can only be found on the Investigative Journal. From New York, I'm Tal Heinrich.
Welcome back. We're now joined by Michael Pregent, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute and a senior Middle East analyst who has testified last year before the U.S. House Committee on Foreign Affairs, Subcommittee on Terrorism, Non-Proliferation, and Trade on the topic of countering Iranian proxies in Iraq. Michael, welcome. We have listened to some really horrific stories today. There's another boggling case that I didn't mention. This time it's an innocent lady, the mother of baby Gabriel, Nazanin Zaghari Redcliffe, an Iranian-British dual national, a charity worker with the Thomson Reuters Foundation, who was arrested by the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, in Tehran's airport in 2016. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison on national security charges. Michael, all the former prisoners that we spoke to tonight, they told us they felt that they were being used by the Revolutionary Guards or the Iranian regime as bargaining chips.
Yes.
My question to you is, what does Iran aim to achieve in return for freeing these prisoners? In Nazanin's case, there are, by the way, rumors that Iran wanted £400 million owed by the UK government to Iran from some decades-old tank sale.
Right. What they did, just like in the case of Jason, Rezian, and the others, is they take American hostages and they try to ransom them back to the U.S. In the case of Jason and the other three, it was $1.7 billion in exchange, based on the same premise that this is interest owed on military sales that predated the revolution in 1979. So it sounds like the same tactic. And the 400,000 pounds times 4, that's $1.6 billion if you look at it. And this is the way the regime operates. And it's said that this is a regime that can do this and doesn't get criticized in the international community. Zarif still got invited to the G7 by Macron, even as his government continues to detain these dual nationals. In the case of France, they have a French prisoner, French dual citizen. The Brits, the same, the one you just mentioned, and Americans. And these are the countries that need to give sanctions relief to Iran, need to do some sort of appeasement. And that's what these prisoners unfortunately are. They're pawns in this chess game that Iran is playing out in the open, and they're not being condemned for it.
There's another case that's making headlines internationally. It's the arrest of 8 Iranian environmentalists who were accused of spying. That's usually the accusation.
Right.
Do you know anything about their case?
Well, I've seen other cases of political dissidents, of women who simply take off their hijabs, homosexuals, and of course environmentalists. Any criticism of the regime or the supreme leader can result in being detained. And you have the Besiege out there rolling up anyone who disagrees with the government in public. And that's just another example of this. The regime going after environmentalists because they're criticizing the regime's water practices, the water rights issues, things like that.
Last year, President Trump was able to bring about the release of the hostages, the American hostages from North Korea. We all remember those images when the president welcomed them at Joint Base Andrews. How do you think the administration can handle Iran in that sense?
Well, we know Iran's going to be a little bit better than North Korea is at this. I mean, Kim Jong-un wanted to sort of demonstrate some sort of gesture to show that he was willing to talk to the U.S. president. Iran not only wants an exchange of U.S. prisoners for Iranian prisoners, meaning the prisoners that we have that have been detained by the FBI and law enforcement for sanctions violations and procuring, technological components and other things that could be used in a militarized nuclear program.
Right.
They not only want them released, they want money for the Americans as well, and also sanctions relief. And we just have to call them on it. This is something they're doing out in the open, in the international community. If they actually condemned Iran for this and banished Zarif because of these issues, then Iran might actually pay attention. Speaking
of paying attention in the international community, one of the prisoners who was eventually released from Iran, he said, and I'm quoting, "When you're a hostage, you need to know that the world is talking about you." He said the worst thing is that you feel left behind.
Right.
Many of the dual national prisoners were arrested while they were just visiting family. Right. One of them was invited by the regime and arrested by the regime to speak at a conference. What would you say to Iranians with a dual nationality, considering to go there just to visit their family, how concerned should they be?
Well, I'd listen to what Jason said, and I'd listen to what your last guest said as well. It's dangerous to go as a dual citizen because Iran doesn't recognize your American citizenship. And because you're coming from America, they automatically tag you as somebody who has been, who's a collaborator with an agency or a spy on these propped up espionage charges. It's dangerous to go, but if you go, make sure the U.S. State Department knows you're going, and make sure you tell people so as soon as you don't come back, we can put a spotlight on it. But that's the thing. The United States needs to be able to put a spotlight on Americans that have been detained by Iran and not just have it be some back channel conversation at State Department. It needs to be out in the open. It needs to be a encounter on the news, day 27, day 200, day 300. Instead, people say, oh yeah, is he still captive there? We don't remember the release. And that's something that we should work on. That's something that I'll definitely try to work on my end in D.C.
On that note, Michael Prigent, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And that is all for this episode from the Investigative Journal. I'm Tal Heinrich from New York. Thank you for watching.